Welcome to Playful Beginnings, a podcast about the magic of play therapy for therapists, students, and anyone interested. In our podcast, we'll explore the deeper understanding of play therapy and the skills we use when working with children.
We hope to help you understand the why behind what we do and how it helps kids heal and grow. I'm Dr. Kristie Opiola, a working play therapist and university professor in North Carolina.
I'm Dr. Maggie Parker, a play therapist and professor in DC. Hey, Kristie.
Hey, Maggie. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you.
Good. So we've done the skills, and limit setting has a lot of content and nuance. And so we've talked the what, the why, the how, and then let's go into some exploration of the ultimate limit and how we have navigated some of these both within our practice and for me within the school system or as a parent as well.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was sharing with Maggie as we were kind of prepping this session that I was working with a 3-year-old, and scissors were very important to this 3-year-old. And this 3-year-old also loved to use scissors in a way that were harmful to the toys and materials in the playroom. So this child would scalp the dolls in the dollhouse or scalp the Barbie dolls on the shelves, which doesn't sound like too terrible, except most other kids don't want to play with scalped Barbie dolls or scalped dolls, right? That the dolls differentiate and the hair helps to differentiate the dolls, and they're expensive. And so I am not wealthy and cannot just furnish my playroom with a million different dollhouse baby dolls. So anyhow, kiddo came in, scalped the first doll. This was not the first session that they did that. I put the limit in, went through the model 3 times. I know you really want to cut the hair of the doll, but dolls are not for cutting the hair off. You can choose to cut paper or you can choose to cut tape. Now, I do want to say scissors were incredibly important to this kiddo. I started off, they really liked cutting things in the playroom. And so I didn't want to jump right away or threaten. I had to go through all 3 steps of ACT and then went to choice giving. I actually did more than 3 times because the kid was little and I could see that they were trying to make a decision. Just their desire and want was so much higher than their ability to regulate in the moment. And so did get to the point where, if you choose to continue to cut the doll's hair, you choose all done with scissors for today. If you choose to cut paper or cut tape or whatever the alternative is, you choose to continue to use the scissors for today. And after, I think 4, maybe 5 times of going through that, they decided not to use scissors for the rest of the play session today. I didn't take it away forever. I think it's important that this is it's not a long-term consequence. We want to give kids lots of opportunities to re-regulate themselves. And in a week, he would have that opportunity again. And he did say several times, but just for today. I'm all done with scissors just for today. Yes, you can choose to play with scissors again next time. He would give the scissors up and I never took the scissors away. I never took them out of his hand. I never removed them from the space. He put them down. They stayed where he put them. He would refine them, 20 seconds later. It was almost like, okay, I put them down and now I can have them again. But it took us about 7-8 minutes for him to get all the way through where he could get himself regulated enough in the playroom and leave the scissors where he left them. And I did give him the alternative. He could put them in my hand, right? And I could put them on the counter, or he could leave them on the table when he was all done with scissors, trying to give him a sense of control of where the scissors went. He's like, I could put them in the cabinet. I was like, you can choose to put them in the cabinet. That's all okay. And remember, he's 3. So this idea of really regulating is a skill he's still developing. He's still working on and being mindful of that as a play therapist and staying empathic, really trying to convey my understanding of his desire and his want and how important this was. But after, I think it's about 7.5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes, 45 seconds, he's able to get himself regulated enough that he could continue the play session for the remainder of the time and not play with scissors anymore. And most importantly, next week when he came into the playroom, he used scissors in an appropriate way. I never had to go through limit setting for scissors again in the playroom. We did limit setting around other things, but not scissors. He remembered, and he would say that in other sessions, the hair is not for cutting in session. And those,
Yeah.
you remember the doll's hair is not for cutting. He's like, yep, I don't want to be all done with scissors for today, because the desire for scissors was so strong for this kiddo. He just loved scissors. I also knew at home he wasn't allowed to play with scissors. So this was one of the few spaces that he was given permission and complete control in the session to play with scissors in many of the ways he would want. And so reminding ourselves of that can be really helpful. Was it challenging? Yes. Did I feel like I was on repeat? Yes. But was it really important for him to see that he could get himself under control and he could still have a desire and a need, right? Which is playing with the scissors. And if he used them in ways that were socially acceptable, then he can use them in many of the ways he would want to in the playroom. Yes. And that was more important to me than me taking scissors. And I actually show this video to some of my students, and they're, why did you not take the scissors away? He handed them to you. Why did you not hide them or done it? And I said, my goal is not solely to stop the behavior, but to help him know that he's able to get himself under control and he's able to still have a desire and need and get it met in ways that are appropriate. If I take them from him or I pick up and remove them, then that can be problematic. Now, there are times, now I do want to say one of the things, he did threaten to cut my hair, right, with the scissors. And he grabbed a corner and had the scissors. And I am tall. You can't see that on this podcast, but I am a tall female. And I could stand up easily and he would not have access to my hair. Or as Maggie has shared with me, Dr. Bratton said you could also put your hand over his hand with the scissors and lower the scissors so the threat is not immediate. So you won't be as reactionary in those moments. And I think those are important, mindful things. It's not about controlling. Maggie wasn't told to take the scissors away or wrestle them from the kid or, whatever. It was, you can just kind of use power of
And I think
extremities to help, like, cue to the kid that that's not going to be acceptable too. And I will say, most importantly for this kid is I stayed empathic the whole time. I never got too firm, or I didn't threaten, or I didn't do other things, because that would have really escalated him instead of to de-escalate to get himself under control. And so we are the thermostats in the room, and we have to remember that when we're doing limit setting and advanced limit setting for kids.
yes. And I think, what you're saying too is that, yeah, we can say do it 3 times and then do this and then do it 3 times. I think sometime, or we can say do the ACT. There are going to be times that you kind of have to deviate. And so being very aware of that and flexible is going to be really important. And the time Kristie's referencing was my first ever play session. So I was talk about pressure. I was in Dr. Orlander's class and Dr. Bratton was supervising me. And this child just so quickly, right? It happened so quick. I was sitting at the craft table in front of the 2-way mirror and just took the scissors, put their hair up and went boop and cut their bangs. And in the meantime, I'm going, you really want to cut your hair? Hair's not for a cut. And then it was over. And that's when Dr. Bratton was, it might be okay to do this first and say, oh, you really want to cut your hair. Hair is not for cutting. And so I had to go and tell mom or whomever was there that they had cut their hair. And thankfully they were understanding. But a year later, I was still seeing this child and they wanted to brush my hair at the craft table. And there were scissors right there. And I was like, And so I had, thankfully, again, it was that 2-way mirror. So I could kind of have my eyes as to what's happening I didn't take the scissors. I didn't, I didn't eliminate that possibility. And I
Yeah.
trusted the child. Did I have to regulate myself deeply? Yes, I did. I was having, but that child deserved my trust, and she had it, and she needed it. And, it was important, and she didn't even try it. It was not even part
And,
of the repertoire.
and it doesn't mean because you had a little bit of caution, because sometimes the kiddos that we see in the playroom, maybe they're coming because they need support and regulation or help with impulsivity or whatever their presenting concerns are, where they may appear one way and then have these sudden blips of brilliancy that can cause problems, right? So it's okay. I think it's okay, Maggie, to have that level of caution in those moments. And I don't think any of us want kids to cut our hair.
No.
We go to Most of us go to professionals to get our hair cut, not our child clients to cut our hair. So I
Yeah.
think that's another thing just to be thoughtful of, you know, when you're saying, and I was going to use the two-way mirror to keep myself calm
Yeah.
because it would give me warning if she did, grab the
Right.
scissors.
Yeah, you're aware.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, you're alert, you're aware of what's happening, and trusting in that child did not even go there. And so I think that was an important lesson for me. And I remember having to calm myself and making sure that I was okay, that I would,
Mm-hmm.
that because what would then happen within the relationship if the child then did cut my hair, and how would I respond in that way? And I
Yeah.
think that, as we kind of explore some of these things, one, and we're going deeper, but something that I thought was really cool that you've talked about, and I would really appreciate if you would kind of explore it, is when we talk about the emotional safety,
Mm-hmm.
what does that look in the room? And you've had some pretty intensive experiences around limit setting within that capacity, while
Yeah.
recognizing the needs of the child and balancing that with how we respond and the limits to that.
Yeah. Mm, such a tough one for me. The emotional
Okay.
safety. I think not in a bad way. I think it just so many thoughts are going through my head as we're talking about this. I think for first and foremost, really the belief in children and belief in the process is really grounds me in really challenging limit setting or challenging emotional relational struggles with kids. I have shared this on the podcast before. One of the populations that is my area of specialty are kids who have a lot of attachment disruptions. So, if that's adoption, if that's foster care, if that's some type of parental child break. And so, I do get some cases that have a lot of um, emotional instability and a lack of trust in relationships, and sometimes as defense mechanisms kids will have behaviors that are more challenging in the playroom, such as if emotions feel so unsafe or relationships feel so unsafe, they're going to use a lot of defense mechanisms against building a secure relationship consistently in the playroom. So I do want to start it by saying that. So what Maggie is talking about is that I worked with a school age child who used a lot of defense mechanisms to protect herself in relationships. And here I am, child centered, believe strongly in the relationship, wanting to convey empathy and unconditional positive regard, and watching my own congruence in session, and really showing up for this kid week after week, where her experience in relationships were so threatening that here this Pollyanna-esque therapist who really wants to be kind and nice felt so untrusting to her that she would use a lot of verbal assaults back and forth in session. So she did a lot of ridicule, critiquing, name calling, At one point, she told me if I could just stop breathing, that would be really helpful because just me trying to breathe was so noisy and annoying to her. That was not something she was interested in being close to or around during our session, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you really think about that, you're like, wow, even the way I breathe bothers you, as well as the way I speak, the way I do my hair, the clothing choices I make. We met during lunchtime, and so she often brought her lunch in. And my supervisor at one point suggested maybe eating lunch at the same time so that almost parallel play, we could be in the same space and see if that provides some safety for her. And I chewed too loud, and I can't believe you brought that for lunch. So it was just a lot of constant
It feels like so
critical
many
responses.
conversations I have with Lee. I'm like, you're breathing too loud, you're walking too loud, you're eating too loud.
Except this is not my partner, and this is not the
Right.
person I've like chosen to be in a relationship with. I've chosen to see, but that's a
Yeah.
very different relationship.
Yes.
But it was a lot of personal attacking back and forth, name calling, and she had some choice names to say. And so setting limits around some of that is challenging in the sense of yes, these are not socially acceptable, so I should be setting limits, but there is a need, a desire, an emotional response that this is coming from. I sought a ton of supervision in this case because this was a challenging case. And this was not one or two times. This was a whole school year of getting the same type of responses from the child. Trust me, when I questioned is CPT the approach for this kiddo, and every time I had a question, this kid made a shift, a positive shift in their life. They either were able to drive in the car, and I was not the only person getting this, by the way. This is this child's way of being. So at the start, the teacher had shared this kiddo had no friends. This was not someone people chose to engage with in the classroom, on sports teams, and she would not be picked. And they would ask to not even have to pick her compared to picking her last and for games or projects or at PE or anything like that. So this kid got a lot of messages of rejection. Family, same way, related to family. I remember meeting with the parents at one point, the message I got, this is just her way of being, and we've kind of given up on thinking that she will be any different. And I don't really think therapy will be helpful in any way. And I think we just should all accept that she's an unkind person. And I was like, ooh, that hurts. And so rejection from parents, rejection from siblings, and not because they were just so hurt in the relationship, right? And so really had needing to manage this carefully so that she wasn't also getting rejection from me. But she made a lot of shifts. So I would say I was not okay being I was okay to being cursed at, but there were some curse words that I was not going to be okay with. So the B word, maybe I might not be okay with that, or even something more, see you next Tuesday. I might not be okay with that word, or some other very vulgar ways of, Maggie just got the see you next Tuesday,
Yeah.
vulgar ways of responding to me that I would set a limit. The other thing I really had to acknowledge is that there was going to be times that her approaches did hit a really tender spot with me, and I reacted instead of responded with a limit setting or reflecting or something like that. And it was my responsibility to repair in those moments and let her know that, oh, man, that really touched me in a spot that I didn't recognize. And I came back in a really unkind way to you. And I'm sorry, that's not my intent in here. Even though I think that was her goal, I
Right.
think she really liked when she could penetrate my wall of acceptance sometimes because that's what she was accustomed to. So I led into that. And then to be able to repair was really important. But it is hard emotionally. And I needed to carefully schedule her because it was hard to just jump from her to another kid. I needed a few minutes to resettle my nervous system in response to that. Supervision was really important in talking about this client and my experience of this client and the areas she did push in on for me, right? Both with my supervisor, but also in personal counseling to make sure that I was not creating ill will for this child or feeling I couldn't be helpful. And when those questions or any of that stuff came up, it was really important for me to process through that with people I really trusted and felt that could give me good guidance. And I'm a big proponent of taping your sessions. This child absolutely refused to assent to taping. So it was not something that I had videotape on. I got consent from the parent, but the child was adamant. And it was one area I feel I could give her in our relationship. So there were many times I wish I had it on video, not to share this child with the world for teaching purposes in the future, but for my own growth. Let me see what's happening for me in these moments. Am I as congruent as I think I'm trying to be? Am I able to be empathic when someone is shooting daggers at you left and right and you're working so hard to protect yourself? It's a really rare case. I have not had another client with that level of just wanting to harm the relationship as a whole. I've had kids who've done a lot of protective behaviors around relationships, scratching and cutting. And I know that I've shared that on here as, you know, anytime you would get anywhere relationally close or they would come to seek relational closeness that felt so threatening, they would do something to push it away. So one of my kiddos would scratch. And so I would leave with scratch marks on my face. But it was not, she wasn't doing it cognitively. It was more of a really deep level safety seeking kind of thing. And I think that's where supervision and really thinking about what is the purpose of the behavior for the kid is really important for our own emotional safety. And setting limits is okay. It is okay to set limits from being called the B word or other vulgar words that are really hurtful to you. I wouldn't say don't do that. Just understand where that behavior is coming from, because then we can communicate the limit in a way that is really empathic and communicate or acknowledge the feeling or want or desire for the kiddo.
Yeah.
But and as I had better understanding, I could do that better. And I think it became more effective for them than just people were calling bad words.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's what you were targeting,
Yeah.
Maggie, when you were bringing it up, but
it is because it's really tough to know. And there are things that I really like that don't bother me. And I worked in a juvenile detention center, so lots of relational trauma, lots of trauma. And, you know, there are things that would happen that I'm like, that's okay, right? You can yell, you can do this. And then there are things that feel a little bit less emotionally safe in that space, whether they're calling each other names in group or they're calling me names or they're calling themselves names. And so trying to kind of set limits around them. You know, there are some things that would come up that, you know, obviously this is with teenagers, but they'd be like, we're going to jump you. Everyone's mad at you because I had to something. I'm like, okay. And I was pregnant and I was just, oh, all right. And they're like, what are you going to do? Are you going to fight us? And I was like, no, absolutely not. I care about you deeply. I'm not going to fight you. You know, you're really upset with me and you want to fight me and I will not fight you back.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do? Well, likely I'd fall into the fetal position and scream until a guard came. And that's probably where we're going to go. You know, and then that kind of, because I didn't immediately shut them down and I was trying to have that conversation. Again, they were older, so that conversation was different, but it kind of took the wind out of their sails a little bit. You know, they're like, oh, you're not responding the way we thought you would.
Well, yeah. And I often think for many kids, as their behaviors escalate, we react to it. And so we try to get bigger, louder, more demanding, controlling over kids. And if you're listening, you can't see this, but I'm kind of raising one hand over the other.
Yeah.
So as that creates this power struggle, then the child is going to escalate above you to feel more heard and understood and convey their message. And then all of a sudden we're just climbing this ladder to see who finally gets to the top. That's going to either chicken out or jump off, or everyone's going to, you know, do something that we regret. And that's what that sounds like. And instead of they kind of raised the stakes. And instead of you raising with them or coming in for power, you were reflecting, understanding. So kind of setting the temperature that that is not going to work for me.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm not going to respond to that in the way that you're hoping. And so they could have, and sometimes kids will escalate more. And this happens with limit setting sometimes. We'll see this play out. They'll escalate some more. So they walk one step up the ladder, but you're not getting on the ladder. You're staying on firm ground. You're really setting the temperature, setting kind of the status in the room. That tends to de-escalate kids at some point because they're not getting the reaction that
Right.
they wanted out of you. And because you didn't react and you were just very matter of fact, they're like, oh, okay, well,
All right.
that didn't work the way I wanted. Okay.
And I think I have two examples too of parenting, how this has come into play. And this is when they were younger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when setting limits as a parent, especially if it's in public, I think there's also this fear of judgment. I think it's a tough time to be a parent because everyone can record you at any point and put you on social to shame you, right?
Yeah.
So I had that in the back of my mind when I tried at one point, and I was like, if you choose not to put on your shoes, you choose to go to school without your shoes. And I'm trying to, carry all of the bags and the diapers and everything. And it was cold outside, and a parent next to me in the parking lot was, wow, no shoes. And so I gave into that fear, and I was like, put your shoes on. And I forced them on. So I tried to calm myself for the next, limit setting experience of shirts. And so I was, you really don't want to choose a shirt. You don't want to do this. Shirts are for putting on. And we went through this, and, you can't wrestle a 3-year-old. It's like they become octopi and can maneuver themselves out of all things. And so I stopped and I was like, okay, if you choose not to choose a shirt, then you choose to go to school without a shirt on. You really don't want to do this. And they walked in without a shirt. They went down the elevator without a shirt. I had people looking at me. I had enough social capital within this space that I knew that this was a safe space for my child and a safe space for me. And I'm not going to get into the power struggle. And so I left shirts at school. And someone later came to me and they said, why, what's going on? You didn't have a shirt on, because they had since put a shirt on. And they said, well, I chose not to. And to me, that was a win.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, so you're accepting that personal responsibility. This is kind of more choice giving, I guess, but that was what that's what they chose. And then another time it was cold outside and we were going to a friend's house, and my child was, it's my body, my choice. I choose not to wear shoes. And I was, oh man, you're really using the language. I was like, okay, well, outside is, it's cold. You really don't want to put your shoes on. Shoes are for wearing. So if you choose to go here, you choose to put on shoes. Mm-hmm. And it was an hour and a half of meltdown, of crying, and me just having to say, you are really frustrated. You really want to go to your friend's house. You can choose to go to your friend's house when you choose, when you choose to put your shoes on. And as a parent, I then started getting frustrated. And so I had to tap in to my support network instead of giving in. And so I had to tap in, and had my mom FaceTime with my daughter, and still having that, you really are frustrated, you really want to do, and just kind of reiterating that. And so I think it can happen too as parents. Now, it didn't happen, it kind of happened with the scissors. You explained that they didn't ever get to go to their friend's house because they chose not to put shoes on. And that was a tough choice. And they didn't like that choice. But that was also their choice. And so it kind of goes to limits and choice setting, but also having to remain true. There's no other, I didn't feel like there was another limit that needed to be set in that moment. If you choose not to do this, you choose to never eat again or never go to your friend's house. Sometimes as parents,
but we say that as adults
we
to
do.
Kids out of our own not sure what to do. And I think that's what Maggie was talking earlier, to come up with some just general alternatives, even if it's after the fact. right? For parents and teachers who may be listening, right? Sometimes it's not in the moment, but it's after at your PLC meeting or that night over, dinner when your kids are asleep. Oh my gosh, listen to what happened today. And let's think about some alternatives that I could have given,
Right.
which can be fun. I mean, because
It's,
you could be hooting and hollering of
oh yeah,
ridiculous choices you could give, but then coming to, okay, I'm going to feel a little more armed now in the
right.
future. And I think that's true. That's what happens in supervision too.
Right.
I wonder what alternatives we could have set here
Instead.
that may have met the need of the child more than getting to threat or jumping too quickly to the ultimate limit.
Right.
Because we didn't talk about the ultimate
No, we
limit, but
have.
there are times when, in the end, you're going to have to, in rare occasions, and I can say since I started practicing in 2012, I have set the ultimate limit, I think, twice.
Same.
So it's not used very often, but before you get there, you want to have and plan for other things. I think sometimes we just feel so out of control. It's where we jump too early
Right.
without giving kids a true chance to try to get themselves under control and in regulation.
And I think even when I reflect on the time that I gave an ultimate limit,
Mm-hmm.
I felt very much, I'm reflecting on it now. Was that needed?
Mm-hmm.
What was, like what was going on for me? So in that experience, a child was really struggling to be in relationship and would often attempt to hurt me. And, we'd do all of those things, but never actually, sometimes would step on my feet. You were talking about scratching and there are limits around that, right? But this time sand was thrown in my eyes.
Mm.
And so I was, at that point, I
We're
think
done.
out of the relationship.
Yeah.
And so I said, if you choose to throw sand, is you're really frustrated or whatever, and sand is not for throwing at people. And I said, if you choose to do that, you choose to leave the room. And that was ultimately what this child wanted, because being in relationship was so tough. And so I just handed them a platter of how to get out of this relationship. And they did it again. And so I think looking back, this is where supervision is really helpful. Of what's something else that you could have done in that moment that
Mm-hmm.
would have had the boundary without the break of that relationship in that moment.
Yeah.
It's not my
Yeah.
problem.
But it happens to all of us. I mean, I don't think you're alone in that, Maggie. I think we've all been there. I was trying to think of the two times that I set the ultimate limit. Yeah. And then there's other limits I've set that I'm like, why did I do that? Like, what? There's not even a purpose. What, what was happening for me in that moment, in that day, that got me to the place of feeling like I needed this relationship to end?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's other times I've said it that I'm like, this child needed to know that that behavior was not okay.
Yeah.
Right. And that our
Other way.
playtime is going to end. I will say it is something you should talk about parents in your initial consult about, your sessions are 45 minutes. There may be moments for your child that we may end early. Let's talk about what those are and why those are in place. And in those moments, what will be most helpful. So I don't want you to interrogate your child about why. I don't want you to shame or blame them. Just let the consequence of leaving early be the consequence.
Conversations.
Conversations. Also, if I'm going to need your help, I won't remove a child from a playroom, but I'm happy for a guardian to at times, in the sense that I'm not physically going to put my hands on a child to get them out of the playroom. But I might ask a parent to do that. And again, I've only used that very sparingly. I can think of one client that the client was so out of control, they needed help leaving the playroom at the
Yeah.
end.
I
But
think that that's an important thing to explore too, because I'll see that a lot on posts is they won't leave the room. So that is a very rare occurrence that I'm going to invite the parent in to assist me in that.
yeah.
I don't know if I've ever used that, because I'm able to set the limit and the cues, standing
Mm-hmm.
up,
You're not
turning
going to
out
the
the light,
door.
opening the door, all of these things. And when you stop then responding and using the skills of what they're doing and focus on, you really want to keep playing, now is time for leaving, it kind of takes the fun out of
Yeah.
continuing to stay, of what they want, what they about the room in and of itself, right? So I think
Yeah.
for those listening, this is not something that Kristie and I would do in under quote unquote normal circumstances of a child just having
No. And I will say that I asked the parent to come in after 20 minutes of asking the child to leave the playroom.
yeah.
And it just kept escalating her instead of de-escalating her. Um, and I had talked to the parent about it early. And then in our last consult, we kind of revamped it because I saw it becoming more problematic. But yeah. And then the parent tried to coax them out of the room, bribe them out of the room. I was like, please just pick her up and take her out of the room. Don't go through all of that. We've talked about this. At that point, you're so tired, and your
Really?
next client is sitting in the waiting room, and you're like, I need us to finish this up right now. So sometimes pressure is in there too, and pressure can really play a role in how we respond at times. And so maneuvering through that is important.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is understanding, because I find the times that I struggle most with limits are when I'm worried about other people that are around, or the volume level, or if there's a painting on the wall and they want to throw a ball. I really don't care if they throw a ball, but I would care if we broke the frame. So thinking about those things as you're entering a space and creating a playroom or entering into a playroom, okay, what are some things that I need to consider, and where might that be? I think helps you feel more prepared in that moment.
And
So
in saying all that, that does not mean we come in and we say, here are the
no.
rules to the playroom. We would only set them when a child is skirting on that border of harming self, harming others, harming materials, harming the space, doing something that would be socially unacceptable or would
Right.
cause some type of problem or damage the relationship in some way. Those would be the reasons we would set a limit.
Yeah.
And just to give an example of social acceptability, because sometimes people don't really know what that means. I have two. I worked in a school at one point, and at the school, our playroom was not right off the main office, but was kind of across the hall in a conference room, off a conference room. So close enough. And this kiddo was little, but was really feeling themselves. And, you could play in many of the ways you want in here. He's like, let me see. Can I play in this way? Sure. Can I play in this way? Sure. Let me try all these curse words. Now, in my office, I would be totally okay with that. In a school setting, I'm not okay with that. And I'm not okay with that because it's not okay in this environment. And he would be punished as he left the playroom because I know they could hear us. And he wasn't just saying them, he was screaming them at the top of his lungs. So everyone could hear him saying curse words, right? So I would put a limit on that. So that's one example of social acceptability, is that in space with me, it's socially acceptable, but outside of the space and in the environment that we're currently in, that would be a problem. And that may be true in your office too, if you have parents who have really strong feelings about something. The other one was I allowed a child to use our easel paints and paint our faces. So she painted her face and my face as panda bears. Or panda bear. So black eyes, white. Not thinking about what that would look like as we went out to the waiting room. And I knew her mom would not have a problem with it. But what about all the other moms sitting in the waiting room now watching my face painted and were maybe horrified at the fact that, would you go to that extent? I'm not okay with that with my child. And so, right. So then it was okay to paint, but then we had to wash our faces before we left the playroom. So are there other ways to navigate that? I also came to find out that even though easel paint is washable, some colors don't come out as well as others, and some leave stains on your skin. So black paint around your eyes will color the skin around your eyes blue because that is the base paint, and blue does not wash off of the skin very well. So then I would have completely looked like I had been beaten up every time I left the playroom. So that also became problematic, just as a fun, you live and learn, everyone, you live and learn. But so then setting limits around face painting, right? That faces aren't for painting. We could paint hands because parents weren't as bothered by hands being painted, but they may be bothered by us coming out looking tigers, panda bears, whatever we may be, zombies, whatever it is for kids today may not be the right response. So to base realities in the playroom, to social standards may also be a requirement that you have, even though you don't have a problem with your face being painted, we might need to set a limit because the rest of the world might have a problem with that. And we don't want to set the kid up for anything, as well as we want to make sure everyone feels safe coming into this space. And so those would be socially acceptable, why we might set a limit. Just to give examples of two ones that I can think quickly off the top of my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kristie, this was really helpful.
I know. This was much longer than our 30 minutes.
Well, so for those listening right now, what we're going to do is we've talked about the what and the how. I mean, I'm sorry, we talked the what and the why. We've talked about how, and then we'll have an episode on kind of what this looks like, different ways in which we've done this, and discuss the ultimate limit and what that looks like. So because limit setting seems it's a big thing, we want to give
and
it.
It's challenging as a therapist. It is a very different way of working with kids. And so I do think I'm glad we've taken the time to explore it pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, I agree. So make sure to look up our socials and Play Therapy Space on Facebook, the Play Therapy Space on Instagram. We are on YouTube if you want to watch us. That we put out a lot of clips that might be helpful, hopefully. And also you have our website, theplaytherapyspace.com. I'm a little behind on sending out those one pagers to our followers, so know that they are coming. So if you sign up for our newsletter, what you get is little one pagers that come weekly or bi-weekly on what it is that we're discussing. And we're going to start, after we do skills, we're going to start a chapter on diagnoses. So I think that's really helpful. Tisha Moon out of the Family and Child Place reached out and said she'd really be interested in exploring what child-centered looks like within these different diagnoses that people are having. And so we'll go there too.
Yeah. Which makes us want you to know if you have ideas or things you'd like us to cover, email us at info@playtherapyspace.com. You can also email us personally, Maggie@playtherapyspace.com or Kristie@playtherapyspace.com. And we will do our best to get back to you as quick as possible. But that does help us design our content as we're going. So
yes, we'll give
thanks
you
for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all. Have a great day.
Bye. Now I gotta hold on one second. I've got too many things up. Okay.